Alright. Made chapter 10. I said I'd make it to chapter 10, so. Or I wanted to make it to chapter 10, and we did it today. Yay, welcome back. I don't really have any news. Also, I haven't said this yet, but happy birthday, Todoroki. Yeah, anyways, let's get started. Mastermind Rise of Anarchy. Written by Cloud. My head in the clouds, not coming down. Read by MHA. Chapter 10. Potential. Summary. Wasn't there some saying about standing on a precipice? Bakugo massaged the soreness out of his wrists and ignored the bags under his eyes as he pulled a wrinkled UA uniform, leaving the tie hanging on the back of his desk chair to collect dust as usual. No one could even stand to look at him long enough to figure out he wasn't wearing a tie, much less the state of his uniform, so he wasn't too worried about his appearance. Class has gotten a little bit harder since he began his nightly executions, but Bakugo could handle a little bit of tiredness, and Katsuki could handle a little bit of tiredness and quirk fatigue, especially since it wasn't like he hadn't been sleeping before hitting the streets anyways. No one had called him out on it yet, but Bakugo was careful to avoid as many cameras as possible when leaving campus and kept his face covered when he was off it. It wasn't like he was doing anything illegal, just beating up some villains who deserved it, but he knew the virus vultures would probably love to sink their claws into his new hobby and somehow circle it back around to the rumors about Deku, and Katsuki was too fucking tired for that shit. They wouldn't be wrong saying that he was out there because of Deku, but they probably would get it all twisted and make Katsuki seem like a villain when the truth was is that Deku had gotten a big head and decided to forget that he was a quirkless weakling that couldn't even cut it as a rent-a-cop, much less the number one villain. Deku was a weakling. He had always been a weakling, so all those stupid villains who had decided it was a free-for-all now that the hero commission was gone were even weaker than he was. They were good practice. And yeah, maybe he wasn't being gentle with them. He was sure Ito would probably have a conniption and insist that the heroes were supposed to minimize injuries or whatever, but Katsuki didn't see what the fucking problem was. They were villains, he was a hero, and they deserved whatever was coming for them. If a couple would-be muggers went to jail with a broken arm or a few burns, it wasn't Katsuki's problem. That was on them for being villains. He slumped his shoulders as he ignored everybody at breakfast and made his way to his homeroom. Kirishima wasn't talking to him, and it was really starting to get on his nerves. When everything first went down, he had figured that once Shitty Hair got out of his system, they would be fine and be back to being not friends again. But even after they destroyed a couple walls and got in a good few hits on Kirishima, wasn't feeling any better. He thought Shitty Hair, of all people, would be able to tell that Deku was an idiot and it wasn't his fault. But apparently he and everybody else and his own man blamed him when he didn't fucking do anything wrong. Katsuki groaned and slumped down in his seat. Whatever. It wasn't like he cared about those extras' opinions anyway. So the only thing he cared about was being the best. And no one was going to get in the way of that. Not his parents, not Kirishima, and definitely not Deku. Batdoll excused herself from dinner and practically ran to her room. It felt like things had been more tense over the past few days. She knew it was probably just her being paranoid. In truth, things have been more tense since, well, yeah, she'd survive at least, even though sometimes she wished she hadn't. She wished she could see it in her teammates' eyes sometimes, now that the pity that she was quirkless. They'd reassure her that they didn't think any less of her now, but that wouldn't stop them from being friends no more. She couldn't fight alongside them anymore. She couldn't help them save lives or stop villains. She was useless. And to make it worse, Mastermind was finally revealed, and Ragdoll hadn't been able to get the bitter taste out of her mouth as she realized that they were the same. They were both quirkless. Even if she hadn't been born that way, it disgusted her that they had something in common. She didn't want to have anything to do with him, which was probably why she hadn't thrown away the note she'd found inside of one of her shoes. Despite how suspicious it was, she was also and also probably why she'd hidden it from her teammates instead of letting them know that there might have been an improver. Don't you want back what was stolen from you? Side note real quick. Bolded O, bolded W, bolded H, bolded E, and bolded R in the words you, want, what, stolen, and from. Neito Monoma looked out of the window and allowed his mind to wander as President Mike reviewed the basic English grammar for the umpteenth time. His grandfather had made sure that he was fluent years ago, so now this was either wasted or he could put it to good use as he was doing right and use it to strategize. He read over Mastermind's escape plans and consisted a theme that they were all going to need manpower, all the manpower they could get, to breach the walls of Tartarus. Villains would be helpful of course, but most thugs and some career criminals weren't going to be prepared against the technology in place around this island, not to mention the highly trained Tartarus guards and any heroes that came to their aid. No, breaking into Tartarus would need a team of elite criminals and maximize physiological damage as many heroes and turn as many heroes as they could. On one hand, Neito could probably afford to ignore the issue entirely. Shigaraki was in charge of the league's doing outside of UA, while Monoma's authority and expertise only extended to the front gates, and since adult heroes would be much more capable of breaking down Tartarus' defense than a bunch of teenagers would be, then theoretically, Monoma didn't actually need to do anything. Yeah, right. Neito is actually competitive, and there was no way he was going to let Shoto, a former member of Class 1A, outdo him and take all of the glory. Megni's plan for indoctrinating the next generation was still in the beginning stages, but Neito couldn't help but smirk at how perfect it'd be if there were UA students in attending to those meetings actually starting to take place. It would add so much credibility to their mission. In addition, the normal riff-raff that the villains normally recruited were some famous hero students considering switching sides, so Neito had to keep an eye out for anyone whose response might have been less than enthusiastic since Mastermind's arrest. Bakugo, of course, was the most obvious choice. Neito didn't know if the teachers hadn't noticed his new bruises or chose to ignore them, but he was starting to crack, and it was only a matter of time before he snapped completely. If it had been anyone else, he'd definitely would have been Neto's first choice, but it was Bakugo. Not only was the guy absolutely insufferable, he had a history with Midoriya, and if then Mastermind escaped, then he would resume his place as a trusted advisor to the League and anyone who wasn't willing to listen to him, which Bakugo obviously wasn't, would be a loose cannon and a liability to the League couldn't afford. So Bakugo was out. That didn't mean that there were other options. Kendo, for example, had been more quiet than usual. If he could stay close to her, even if it meant having to annoy Class 1A a little more, then he might be able to plant the right seeds to change her mind and express some sort of dislike for the Hero Society. But they weren't quite as promising. He'd keep an eye on them and only make his move if anything changed. But for now, he wasn't going to waste time focusing on them. Then there was the rest of Class 1A. Neito had picked had been hopeful that Uraraka would go off in the deep end after the way Nezu had spun things at the press conference. She seemed to have veered hard in the other direction. So no dice. Most of them were still bitter after Shoto's betrayal, so it would take quite a lot of work to convince them to follow his lead. So Neito mentally filed them in the same group as his classmates. He'd observe and wait for now, then pronounce the moment they showed any sign of entertaining the possibility of switching sides. The bell rang, and Neito let himself be swept along by the wave of students and the wave of dorms. He caught a few glances of some of the 1A students as he walked, and face-palmed when he saw Tokoyami forcing his way against the crowd towards Hound Dog's office. How had he forgotten that little gun? Tokoyami had always been tended to isolate himself, especially when he was stressed. But it was even worse now that it felt like he was being singled out after everything that happened at the summer camp and with Hawks. Neito hadn't missed the way that the class of 1A looked at Tokoyami when they thought he wasn't looking, and doubted that Tokoyami had missed it either. But people were scaredy cats, and so quick to judge, especially when it had been someone mentored by a villain. Sure, Hawks probably hadn't taught Tokoyami anything to encourage him to switch sides, especially since Neito knew that Hawks hadn't even been sure of his decision until the day he fully joined the league. But stupid 1A sheep in 1A didn't know that, and if Tokoyami were to tell them that, they wouldn't trust him. Sidelong glances Neito caught during lunch and joint training practices meant that there were more than one person who expected Hawks's baby bird to turn next. Neito smiled and made his way towards the teacher's dorm. It would take a few nudges to push Tokoyami from the nest to make sure he flew in the right direction, and both he and Ochaco would be valuable assets for the league. Let Shoto try to compete with that. Neito shook his head and adjusted his backpack and finally reached the teacher's dorm. This plan wasn't part of what Mastermind had left behind for them, but Neito couldn't resist no matter how risky it was. He had to do it right away, of course, because if he had anything less, the best of his intentions, he had doubt that Midoriya would even hesitate to kill him, or come up with even worse punishment. Neito suppressed a small shoulder shrug at the thought. He needed to spin this in such a way that made it obvious that he wasn't trying to empower his target instead of manipulate or take advantage of her. It would be difficult, but Neito couldn't lie and say that he didn't enjoy the challenge. He climbed the stairs and made his way down the hall until he reached the right door, then knocked and waited. It only took a few moments, but soon enough a tired Aizawa swung the door open. Oh, Monaba, right on time. Sorry, did I wake you from a nap? Neito asked. If you need, I can come back later. Aizawa shook his head. No, it's fine. I need to make sure those stupid idiots down at the police station don't make a mess in the new training. And on top of that, this paperwork Nezu gave me yesterday, I can't thank you enough for volunteering to watch her. It's no big deal, Neito smiled and waved away his concern. You've got a lot on your plate, I'm pretty sure it's nice to have a few hours to catch up on everything. Aizawa groaned and let Nezu down the hall, knocking quietly on one of his bedroom doors. It opened slowly. Hey, sweetie, your babysitter's here. Neito smiled and crouched so that he was eye-to-eye level to Eri, who looked up from her coloring book to stare at him for wide eyes. Hi there, Eri. You ready to have some fun? That was chapter 10 completed. We are 1/5 of the way done, by the way. I think. Let me double check. I think there's 50 chapters. Let me check the index real quick. Yep, 50 chapters. We're 1/5 of the way done. Yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. Also, happy birthday, Todoroki! Again. Also, is that villain Monoma? So many other side villains. You know, I like it. I'm really loving the sequel so far. I can't wait for the next chapter, see what happens. Is babysitting Aerie. Uh-oh. Anyways, I'll see you guys in chapter 11. Peace.